There's a criminal marketplace online, thriving, global, and terrifyingly efficient. You just need the secret knock.
You can transfer seemingly unlimited amounts of capital across international borders anonymously.
We're talking about people who could have started the next Amazon or eBay, and they didn't because they're making a lot more money and they're barely doing any work at all.
For some of the ransomware actors, hundreds of millions of dollars a year.
Whether or not you know it, you are elbow to elbow with criminals all day long. Maybe not in person, but for sure online.
My team have been chasing these bad guys around the internet, trying to go wherever they go, and they always get new and innovative techniques to try to evade us.
Step right up to your current and everlasting nightmare. I'm Beau Friedlander, and this is What the Hack, the podcast that asks, in a world where your data is everywhere, how do you stay safe online? Kurtis Minder is the co-founder and CEO of GroupSense, where he leads a group of world-class analysts, technologists in the cybersecurity intelligence world. He has been profiled in The New Yorker for his work as a ransomware negotiator. He is the cybercriminal whisperer. His new book is Cyber Recon: My Life in Cyber Espionage and Ransomware Negotiation, just published by Wiley. Kurtis Minder, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Beau. I appreciate it.
Oh, I'm really psyched to have you here. Now, you mentioned much later on in your book, but I wanted to start there about being at a coffee shop and eating some Polyface Farm eggs. So that's some very basic OSINT for me. It tells me where you might be located. Where are you coming to us from today?
Well, when I wrote that, what I was right about there was actually in Arlington, Virginia, but I currently live in Western Colorado. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Joel Salatin.
Me too.
It's phenomenal. Like, it's amazing that you can be so technically adept, digital world, and yet the things that we like the best have dirt on them.
Right. Yeah. And you take it for granted what is necessary to get those things on our plate.
Now, you've built a whole career tracking cybercriminals, negotiating with ransomware gangs, chasing threats. Most of us never even see any of this. I guess what I really want to know is, why do you do it?
It was in the sort of early 90s. I was working at an internet company back then where people would dial into the internet. We would have people break into our systems on occasion, and this boss that I caught hacking in after he was fired, he was the one that showed me how to find this stuff, right? He showed me how to look at the logs and recognize, like, that's not normal. That's somebody that's not supposed to be there. And so that's how I detected him.
So you're working for a provider and you notice someone's inside your network who really shouldn't be there, and it turns out it's your old boss.
You know, in the early 90s, it wasn't quite as contentious as it is now. Laws for cybercrime weren't as scary as they are now. I was, I think, 17 or something when this occurred. All I knew is that I don't think he's done any damage. Let me just get him out of here as quickly as possible, and hopefully that's the end of it. And that's how that played out. But yeah, it was one of my very first times hunting someone down and then interacting with them in the process.
Your book covers the whole universe of cybercrime and cybersecurity, from where criminals operate to how they operate to how you operate to help your clients, and finally, what to do in the worst case scenario. A lot of what happens when you do get got gets lumped under the same label of darknet, or in terms of origin, like how did they get the information or whatever. Some people say dark web, darknet, dark web. What's the difference?
Well, the technical definitions, even though those are also evolving, but if you stick to the original intent, a dark net is a general term for a network that is usually layered or sitting on top of the internet, but not directly accessible from the internet. The dark web would then be a component or a place on a dark net. So one is a component of the other. The dark web is often associated with Tor, but there's other ways to get to that as well. So it's fairly convoluted. I think what's happening now with the nomenclature, just to confuse those who don't live in this world, also congratulations for not living in this world, but the term dark web is becoming broader and broader, and it's including basically anything where sort of illicit transactions occur online. And so that would include Telegram and some WhatsApp groups and things like that. So the media is starting to throw all of that under the dark web sort of category, right?
Well, we're going to get to that later because I do think
Sure.
Telegram and those platforms are a little different. But the markets, let's talk about the marketplace, the criminal marketplace. There's credit card scams, there's enterprise credential markets, there's malware markets, there's zero-day exploit markets.
Weapons, drugs.
Right. I mean, we forget about Silk Road, but it started there really with drugs and weapons. And so these marketplaces produce an average sales volume of hundreds of millions of dollars per year. Items for sale in the marketplaces are largely illicit goods, drugs, weapons, and stolen corporate information and data. And the services they run the gamut as well. Most people aren't Tor users, and they're not on Telegram, right? So they're just living their lives online. But you're saying some of this stuff is starting to show up in more everyday places, like, for instance, the metaverse.
Yeah, that security research community and companies like GroupSense and my team have been chasing these bad guys around the internet, trying to go wherever they go, and they always get new and innovative techniques to try to evade us. They know that we're doing this. GroupSense has something like 4,000 curated personas pretending to be bad guys, and our team speaks like 15 languages. And they know all the hackers speak in those languages. And so we're following these guys around, and they just get more and more creative. And if you think about how the dark web and Telegram markets, how those function, they're text on a screen, which means that you can scrape them. You can write code that just basically grabs it all and puts it in a database, which is one of the things that we've been doing since like 2012. We're one of the early adopters of dark web scraping, and we've got a huge database that tracks all of that stuff. But what if it wasn't written down?
So basically you're scraping these forums because if someone's selling stolen access or bragging about it, you want to be able to catch that early, right? It's like smoke before the fire type thing.
Yeah, but what if it was a conversation, right? And how would you do that at scale? And how would you do that in an organized way? Well, I think the metaverse, while it's not pervasive, we started to see evidence of the bad guys talking about metaverse spaces where they were doing transactions. And so in the metaverse space, I think it depends on which platform, but like, for example, I think in the Meta-based platform, they call them dorms for some reason. But if you can have a private dorm where you have a password to get in. And once you get in, there's a room full of people, and it's like a bazaar. It's like a market. That changes the fundamental way we approach, collection, because a lot of it's spoken word, and there are ways to get around the fact that it's not written down. We have ways to do that. But if you think about the methods to gain access, it becomes more and more like a traditional espionage human operation that the government might do or something like that to get access to those rooms.
So there's a secret knock, basically. I mean, you need to know either a specific URL or channel, and you need to know it's there, right? Can you walk me through the ways one gets to these dark web destinations without providing enough detail to sponsor new criminal activity? Like, just what are we talking about?
It is very much almost a traditional espionage operation. It's who you know and who you can convince to tell you things, and you pull on threads. And we've got over a decade of doing this, so we've got a lot of threads to pull on at this point. We tend to get into some of the marketplaces relatively quickly, the new ones that spring up. So I think in our case, being so tenured in this, let's say, for example, the FBI seizes a dark web marketplace. We're already in sort of this private communications channel with some of the leaders of that particular marketplace. And we're going, hey, where we go now? And they're like, we're spinning up this. And they just, so we follow them. And getting initial access to those things, today, there's a lot of researchers that keep databases of this. They're not going to be on a website someplace that you can click on. You have to know the address. And if you've seen for example, a .onion address, they're not like human readable. They're long, complicated strings with .onion at the end, right? So you have to know what that is to get there.
Right. And just to spell it out, a .onion site is basically like a .com or a .org that you'd visit with the Tor browser, which was originally built to help people stay anonymous, online journalists, dissidents, that kind of thing, military. But of course, bad guys use it too.
Yeah, I mean, you have to quite literally have someone tell you where to go, and it could be a very complicated, long string of characters, to go to. You can't search for it on Google, right?
There are marketplaces that have the look and feel of big operations like eBay, Amazon. You're talking about people who work there who maybe don't dress in a suit and tie, but they're clocking in and going somewhere physical to work. Tell me a little bit about those marketplaces and how they operate.
Yeah, I think, the marketplaces, they're certainly run like a business. And to your point, if you were to send a screenshot of one of these to the average person, they would think it was a Amazon competitor or eBay competitor, the way that it's run. They have escrow services. They have ratings for the buyers and sellers. Some of them, are literally sitting in an office, and there's employees and there's middle management and there's water cooler conversation. And that's also rings true for the ransomware gangs. It's an organized operation that's running these.
Okay, and so your job is to stop all of these marketplaces or monitor to the ones that can affect your clients? I'm just trying to get an understanding of the threatscape and your place in it.
That's a great question. Certainly, if the use case is primarily cybersecurity, they all affect all of our clients because they're all doing the same illicit stuff and selling stolen goods and access to networks and things like that would be interesting to our clients. But there are markets that are more specialized for different use cases. We've also infiltrated those for our clients. For example, we have large pharmaceuticals as clients, and we specifically infiltrated dark web markets and Telegram channels that are focused on counterfeit drug sales. That's 100% what they're focused on. We did something similar for one of our high-tech manufacturers, and it was intellectual property forums in China, right? They're just forums in China that sell stolen circuit boards and stuff off the assembly line. So, from a practitioner standpoint, we're literally looking for whatever risk that the customer is interested in, and then we'll go find where that illicit activity is occurring.
So we've got a rough map of this cyber underworld and an understanding of where the risks lie for each client, following the trail wherever it leads. But I'm still wondering, how did this whole thing become such a well-oiled machine in the first place? What allowed this criminal economy to take root and thrive the way it has?
Well, I think to answer that, you really need to understand how that came about, right? So the way that came about, the way that it gets weaponized is you've got tools like Tor. To your point, was a military application and an open source project that had good intentions, just like the internet.
Right, exactly.
And then
slipped away from us, but
exactly. And so the anonymity that affords people allows you to do things and not get caught, right? That's number one. Number two is around 2010, 2012, something like that, where cryptocurrency really started to take off. Now you can transfer seemingly unlimited amounts of capital across international borders anonymously, not untraceable, but anonymously, right? So those two things. And then if you couple that with a nation state that doesn't have an extradition policy to the countries where most of the crime is being perpetrated, you basically got a free-for-all, and that's what causes this whole environment to exist.
In this environment I do want to stress, it's like cops and robbers. It just happens to be online. And it includes like the police busting people and then flipping them to get them to be informants or get them to be assets in various jobs. Now, but the problem is they'll catch somebody or pretend they've caught somebody, or they'll catch and release and then make that person look like they're burned when they're not burned, so that people are like, oh, I don't want to do business with Bob anymore because
Right.
Bob got busted and he's probably now an asset of the FBI.
That's what happened to Lockbit, right? Yep.
That is what happened to Lockbit.
So Lockbit, it's really one guy, Dimitri, that runs the whole thing. It's a ransomware as a service platform. You alluded to earlier in these marketplaces, you can literally buy access to platforms to commit crimes. Lockbit built one of those. They share the revenue from the ransomware attacks. Dimitri was one of the faster rising stars of the ransomware gangs. He was very vocal on the forums and, had made quite a name for himself fairly quickly.
So any criminal can get online, for, in this case, Lockbit, and say, I'd like to target company XYZ. And what did Lockbit do to facilitate that?
There's also a marketplace where they buy the access to the victim first. So they can go to these initial access broker markets, and every day there's a menu of companies that have been compromised, and you just buy the access. And then
so
you
it's
go
not
to
one-stop
Lockbit.
shopping. You're actually at a marketplace where it's a bazaar, like you were saying earlier.
It's like a bazaar. So you go buy the access first, and then you go to Lockbit or some ransomware as a service platform, and you plug their software into that access, and it deploys the ransomware, exfiltrates the data, locks the files, and creates the ransom note. It does everything automatically. So you don't really have to be sophisticated. You have to know how to use Tor a little bit, but that's about it.
Okay, now, so you've just described someone who has firearms who had to go buy ammunition or something like that.
Right.
And the
Yeah.
psyops that happened to Lockbit, like he got arrested and then they did a catch and release, but they made him look dirty?
Well, so he didn't get arrested. He got indicted, and
Okay.
then they took over his sites. And what they did was they made it look like he flipped, or they at least alluded to that he flipped to the authorities. We don't know if that actually happened, but what happens to Lockbit when that happens, to your point about psyops, is nobody wants to work with him anymore. And so people stopped using that platform for a very long time.
They did pop up again, but he couldn't get the business he once had?
No, and I think it's been a while since I've looked at him, since he's on the sanctions list now. We don't really get to interact with him anymore because he's on the US sanctions list. But the victims that he would put up on his shame site were victims of other ransomware actors. So he's trying to perpetrate as if he's got customers that he doesn't really have. Until very recently, I think that was the case.
So you've got a global marketplace for cybercrime, ransomware as a service. You can spin up like a Shopify site, and entire criminal networks getting ghosted just because someone might have flipped. And now they've started using AI to make it all faster and smarter and a whole lot harder to stop. We'll get into that right after the break.
The Disney Plus Hulu HBO Max bundle. Plans starting at just $16.99 a month. Catch Limitless, Live Better Now Season 1 with Chris Hemsworth on Disney Plus.
We got a lot of work to do.
Alien Earth on Hulu.
This ship collected monsters.
And Final Destination Bloodlines on HBO Max.
Death is coming for our family.
The Disney Plus Hulu HBO Max bundle. Plans starting at $16.99 a month. All these and more streaming soon. Visit Disney Plus Hulu HBO Max bundle.com for details.
Get ready for back to school with H&M. Enjoy up to 50% off mix and match basics, new denim styles, and more. Find their favorites for in and out of the classroom at your nearest H&M or on hm.com.
All right, so we've talked about how organized and scalable all of this has become, but now we've got AI in the mix. What's that actually changing? How are the bad guys using it to get smarter, faster, and harder to stop?
So primarily, I would say that AI is being used for synthetic content primarily, right? So it's making emails look more real, making web pages look more authentic, sometimes assisting with the language in interacting with a client or a victim. Where I believe it's evolved over the last couple of years is every time, let's take ransomware, for example, every time they do one of these attacks, the first thing they do is they take a copy of as much of the client data as they can. And, we've had cases where they've taken 400 terabytes, right? That's a lot of data to comb through, right? As part of the ransomware extortion, one, they've locked the files and they've interrupted your operations, but two, they're threatening to release or sell this very proprietary data that they've taken. In the past, it was very difficult for them, and our strategy sometimes was to simply call their bluff, because for them to find a document to prove their point in 400 terabytes was pretty difficult. It's much less difficult for them now with AI. And so they can create a LLM that looks for certain document profiles. It goes through large data sets, pulls out the files, shows the example excerpts from those files that they can just throw into a chat and go like, I know this about your business. And unless you want everybody else to know about it. And they do the same thing with email boxes. So they can rebuild threads that look very authentic and then loop in an employee and trick them into doing something. They usually use like board level people. So they're getting smarter about it. The second part of that is, you don't need to keep every email and every text message you've ever sent.
You don't?
I know people think, well, storage is cheap. I'll just keep every Google message. The problem with that is like, though I'm a really nice guy, I think I'm a good person, but if you had the last 20 years of my emails, I'm sure you could find an email that makes me look like an asshole out of context, right? And so just get rid of that stuff. Get rid of those extra data artifacts that you don't need.
Can't I just get rid of those emails?
Yeah, right. I think there's probably an app for that. AI will do it, I'm sure.
I'm sure. Look for any instance of me being a bad guy that, or just having a bad night. I didn't sleep well or whatever. Yeah. No, it's true. Right. I think that's true for all of us. But if you're the CEO of a company, you don't have to end up on the Jumbotron at a Coldplay concert to have trouble. You don't need to be on the Jumbotron. All you need to have, to your point, is 20 years of emails sitting on your Gmail account to have a problem.
And use bad password hygiene, to not use MFA, like basic cyber hygiene things. And one of the things I get asked a lot is, Kurtis, there's so much to this cybersecurity stuff. Do we all have to become cybersecurity experts? And my answer is no, just like you don't have to become a doctor to know how not to die. So because we do a lot of ransomware response work and just response work in general, we distill down to the best of our ability how the bad guys are successful. And if you really, dial it down to the core ways the bad guys get in, and keep in mind, they're running a business, so they want to get access to your system as cheaply, as efficiently as possible. And unfortunately, we make it easy for them. People are still reusing passwords. They're not turning on MFA. So these very basic cyber hygiene things that anybody can do and make a huge impact, not just on themselves, but basically the community and society.
And if criminals are so good at the business of crime, why don't they just start legitimate businesses? Because they do seem quite competent.
Well, I think this is pretty profitable. I think we're underestimating how much money they make and how little work they actually do. I tell my clients when we have a ransomware victim, is like, hey, this attack that happened to you is the most important thing in the world to you, but not the lockbit. Right?
So, and what kind of money are we talking about?
For some of the ransomware actors, hundreds of millions of dollars a year. I forget what they estimated lockbit. I think it was like 400 or 600 million that they thought he had done in the last couple of years. So it's a lot.
And what do we think the entire range of cybercrime activity out there is netting a year? Do we have a number on that?
I'm hesitant to say, because I've seen a bunch of quotes around that, and the numbers, they literally, some of them go into the trillions. I can tell you just my sample size, I can confidently say that it's in the hundreds of billions, maybe on the low end based on my sample size. And that's per year. I believe firmly that it's a national security concern for the US.
Well, 100%. It affects our GDP as well. I mean, it's just extremely important for businesses to understand what the threat is and how it can affect them, but also the government, because they are equally vulnerable. I was really struck by one story in your book about a not-for-profit that was hit by ransomware, and one of your negotiators got in there and they were like, we want $2 million, pinky to the corner of the mouth, million. And the fact was they hadn't done their homework, so they didn't know how much money they could get out of this particular not-for-profit, which in this case was doing really good work for people, children, I think, who had cancer.
Yep, exactly.
Now, your negotiator said, when they were asked, they were asked, well, how much can you give us? He said, nothing. How about zero? Zero is the number. And they came back and said, well, we need at least $5,000.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So they agreed on $5,000, which was the cost of the
initial access, right? So what we were talking about earlier, they went to a marketplace and bought the hacked access of that nonprofit for $5,000. That's our theory. Our cost of goods is $5,000. You pay us back, we'll let you go. And yeah, it's just another illustration of how this is sort of run like a business.
Presumably, you're protecting an organization or company, in your case, sometimes even a municipality or a government agency, and you're assessing threatscape, right? For every individual who works there, which is why you have a VIP product, because if they can get to a VIP, they've done their whole job with one fell swoop.
Right.
Now, you write that the intelligence work you do is about outcomes, not data. I want to understand that, because I think it's super important for people to understand that the same guy who said, I see you in my system, if you leave, we're good. Or who said, like, look, you're not getting the $2 million, but I'll give you $5,000 if that's what it cost you to get in here in the first place through your initial access broker. Talk to me about outcomes. When do you make the hop from data to intelligence work?
Yeah, so the outcomes thing is almost a religion at GroupSense, and that's probably my fault. I probably took it further than it needed to go, but it drives so much of our product development. So we throw stuff out that's like, hey, look, unless we can repeatedly and reliably drive an outcome from the thing you're building, we're not going to do it. And so it's really helped us focus as a company. That whole outcomes discussion is really a comment on the overall cybersecurity industry. The way that tech companies and cybersecurity companies included are sort of subsidized, usually venture capital money. It causes them to build products in a specific way, which is get big quick, good dashboards, fancy alerts, stuff like that. But they often don't drive outcomes. If you're a CISO and you've got a dark web solution, and the dark web solution tells you that someone is advertising access to your network, like an initial access broker, and you don't have a next step to validate that, to change that, to stop that, you can't get samples of the stolen access, that's a really crappy product. Right?
Yeah, that just means that you get to watch the slow roll of your own destruction.
Mm-hmm. And so that's, I mean, the reason why we have a platform, and it does create what we call advisories and makes the leap from just data to intelligence, which is data that is enriched in context with recommended steps. That's intelligence, right? So intelligence is when you take data, you enrich it with context, right? So client's contextual situation, make recommended steps, or automatically take those recommended steps. We often just make a recommendation. And that's really when you jump from just data to intelligence.
The difference between data and intelligence is quite simple, because one is dumb, one is stupid. It's just, if you're not in the room, it's meaningless.
It requires a lot of additional work from the customer, right?
No, I almost sort of think that it's, I would say the majority of people, the data by itself is an empty cipher because it's not actionable. There's nothing they can do with that data. Intelligence is not just like what it is and how it works, but what to do now.
Right. And how it's applicable to your use case, your organization. Why do we even care, right? Here's why we care. Here's why it's important. Yep. And here's what we need to do about it, right? That's intelligence.
So that's how big organizations do it. But what if you're not a Fortune 500 company or a government agency? What if you're just you? What can the rest of us actually do to stay safe in a world like this? That's coming up after the break. I'm curious because it sounds to me like you're in the business of, as much as possible, seeing trouble coming and warding it off before anything bad happens, or seeing the thunderstorm on the horizon and going inside before you get wet. But there's a part of this where I always think of cybersecurity as a layered, several layers of Swiss cheese, and I didn't make it up. Deviant Olaf made it up, or I think he did. It was just something I've heard in my circles, cybersecurity circles, where one layer, you can still see through it. 2 layers, you can't see as well. 3 layers.
Right.
It becomes opaque. And so one layer is like, are you really at this point in your life swattable?
I'm sure. I don't want to take it for granted.
I don't want to tempt anybody to try. But the thing is, like, I know, there's 2 layers of this, right? If someone wants to come at me, bro. If someone wants to come at me, like, whatever, I'm locked tight. You can get at me. I'll feel it, but you're not going to get anything. And that's sort of the end of the story. And the local police here know me as well for the same reason. I've said, right, there's a chance someone's going to say, someone's screaming in my basement, give me a call first. And I live in a town of 5,000, so it's not like, it's simple. Now, where it starts to matter is if you are the CEO of a large company. It starts to matter if you're the CISO of a large company. How do you protect?
Well, I think the first step for any of this is education, but we can always do a lot better job of that, making them understand the why so that they adjust their behavior, right?
So let's run through them. One is using a password manager, or do you not do that?
I do recommend using a password manager. And, if you want to get into the basket eggs thing, I'm happy to. But I believe that there's less risk in using a password manager than reusing passwords or attempting to make up your own passwords.
1,000% agree. Second one is multiple factor authentication. Now, are you weighing yourself and doing a retina scan and a fingerprint scan and then saying the rhyme that you learned in 3rd grade, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you should balance it with usability, sure. I think we all know that SMS is probably the least secure way to do that. So, wherever possible, using an application or a token is good. And if you can use biometrics, that's even better. So just basically, it has to be something that you know and something that you are or something that you have. The combination of any one of those two will greatly increase your security.
And just staying up to date. So like making sure that if you're using a site or a service that allows for single sign on, it's not a bad thing. It actually makes your life more convenient and more secure at the same time. What else? Let's just see if we can think of one more. We got MFA, we've got password managers. Is there another one we could throw in there?
Well, so, obviously encryption at rest and encryption in transit.
Sure.
Just use a VPN, use your built-in Apple or Microsoft encryption on your devices. That's easy. That's an easy one.
Yep.
We talk about OPSEC, and that's just more behavioral stuff. Like, don't have a conference call in the lobby of the hotel with two earbuds in yelling customer names and things like that. It's just common sense stuff that I think some of which we lost after COVID, or like we forgot that we're not in an office anymore, and it can cause damage. Right.
Well, and you bring that up, and it's kind of why I brought up Polyface Farms in the beginning of this interview.
I love how you said OPSEC.
Because there was an OPSEC. It was in your OPSEC chapter, I think it was. And what you were illustrating was that you knew something about someone else because their colleague had been at the same cafe, basically screaming through a megaphone.
Yeah, doing a sales call, basically. And it's a weirdly small world. And I think people take for granted that they don't believe that the people around them are going to understand what they're saying or know the people that they're talking about or know the companies that they're talking about or the products that they're talking about, but they will. The other thing I dig into, because I'm about to go to DEF CON in Black Hat, where I'm going to do a book signing. Every year we stay off strip because of OPSEC primarily. Do you want to stay in a venue with 40,000 hackers? No thanks. Right? No thanks.
No, I'm going to DEF CON too, and I'm not walking through that space without my phone off. Right. And my Faraday bag on.
Right, exactly. And so you usually stay in a fairly nice house off strip, and we Uber in, and we have a rule. There is no talking in ride shares. It is not your mobile office. Those people understand what you're saying. And
okay, that's great, OPSEC.
Yeah.
You don't even know that some of those drivers may be getting a VIG on the other side from someone else who paid them to record conversations. We
validated that with a couple drivers one year, that they were getting paid by law enforcement to take notes.
Phenomenal. Now, as DEF CON likes to point out, yes, there are criminals at DEF CON, but there's also criminals at your local store and at the post office and everywhere else. But there is a higher concentration at DEF CON, let's be real. Now, we're talking about OPSEC, so take us on a quick spin of OPSEC for someone who just wants to understand the basic idea.
Just like in the commercial space, where if the bad guys have information about the company that they shouldn't have, or data about the company that they shouldn't have, it makes it easier for them to attack that entity.
Right.
Same with you as a human being. And so, operational security comes out of the military. It's something that they teach in the intelligence schools and for the boots on the ground folks in the military, to keep the bad guys from learning things they shouldn't know. And that's really the premise. And so it's all behavioral. And sometimes people don't think about these things. It's not like malicious. They're not stupid. Why would you think about it? For example, I used to do this exercise. When I lived in DC, I didn't own a car. I had a ridiculous number of motorcycles, but I didn't own a car. And I would walk everywhere. And one of the games I would play while I was walking, I walk from Arlington to downtown to go to dinner and walk back. That's probably like 10 miles. I would do that all the time. And I would look in the car windows of the parallel parked cars, and I would keep track of how many documents that I could read from the sidewalk. And it was a lot. And think about that. That's Washington, D.C. So what kind of documents do you think those are, Beau? Right?
They're terrifying.
So that's what little things like that you can learn. And like I said, the longest chapter in my book is on OPSEC, and I'm actually working with the publisher to finalize an agreement to do another book all on OPSEC.
So OPSEC is key. You can have all the whiz bang in the world to protect you. At the end of the day, a lot of people are going to be their own worst enemy.
The work from home culture that sort of emerged after COVID is part of the problem, in that when we all worked in the same office and there were just cubicles between us, for the most part, there weren't a lot of secrets. We all signed the same confidentiality agreements. If you live in a multi-tenant place or you're in a hotel room, the walls are pretty thin. And I at the time when I was living in DC, I lived in an apartment in DC, and I could hear everything my neighbor said. That means they could hear everything I said.
Yep.
And I'm working from home and I'm doing espionage work. Like, you got to be very careful about that stuff.
Well, there's also the other problem with working from home, especially if you're in the C-suite, is that no longer do you have to, does your OPSEC mean just physical penetration testing at an office with staff and people who are there to keep people out with scanning devices to make sure people aren't getting on elevators. Now it's just your house. Now, is
Right.
your house as secure as an office building? No, it is not. And so when you leave for dinner, are you putting your computer turned off in a safe that's locked? Maybe even
Like you
a
would in a
safe
hotel
with a
room? No.
Faraday cage in it? No, you're not. And so how do you handle this? Is the big point. And I think GroupSense is brilliant for this, because I bet you help your clients understand this better. But, brand protection in a world like this, where your job is to keep CEOs and other VIPs from letting the cat out of the bag or otherwise committing an own goal on themselves with the competition.
Right.
We've talked a lot about nation states, ransomware gangs, marketplaces full of stolen data. But at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff comes down to individual choices, not just what companies do, but what each of us do or doesn't do online. And I know this is something that you care a lot about.
I firmly believe that sort of good cyber behavior and hygiene is a civic duty, and that every single cyber incident, no matter how unimportant you think you are, has an impact on everyone around you. Everything's connected. So if you do 3 or 4 of the things to protect yourself, you're also protecting everyone else. And that's a bit of soapbox I've been on for a long time.
Well, Kurtis Minder, thank you so much for joining us on What the Hack. I appreciate you coming to join us. The book is called Cyber Recon, My Life in Cyber Espionage and Ransomware Negotiation. It's published by Wiley, and you can get it wherever books are published. Kurtis, thanks again.
It's a real pleasure. It's fun.
Okay, so it's time for a tinfoil swan, your paranoid takeaway to keep you safe on and offline. Now, we often think of technology being our guardians. High-tech solutions don't always work, and they can't do anything about the following things. Shred your mail. If you have, like I do, still some mail coming in that has health-related information or banking-related information, you shred it. Really simple. Any sensitive document, if you no longer need it, shred it. Remember, you are going to need to keep pay stubs for a certain period of time in case you want to get a loan. And the same goes for your tax returns. You probably don't want to shred those, but keep them in a safe. It's one of the easiest things you can do and the most overlooked habits we all have, leaving stuff around that can get you got. Now, the other thing that you can do is keep sensitive documents out of public view. In your own house, that counts, which means get a safe. That's what I do. I have there's 3 safes in my house, but keep your sensitive stuff out of the way. And that includes passports, bills, statements of what's happened with your medical care, all of that. Another thing that you might want to do, which my partner does regularly, religiously, is opt out of junk mail. It's good for the environment and it's good for you too. Because the more that you remove yourself from these email lists and mailing lists, the less you will show up on data broker sites. So that's the tinfoil swan. Stay safe out there, and thanks for listening. What the Hack is brought to you by DeleteMe. DeleteMe makes it quick and easy and safe to remove your personal data online, and was recently named the #1 pick by New York Times Wirecutter for personal information removal. You can learn more if you go to joindeleteme.com/WTH. That's joindeleteme.com/WTH. Stay safe out there.
Behind every empire are the people history tried to forget. Lost Roman Heroes tells the stories of the remarkable characters who shaped Rome from its mythical beginnings to its final fall.
Each episode blends armchair storytelling, sharp historical insight, and a bit of humor to bring these lost figures to life. From generals to scientists, from rebels to empresses, from priests to politicians, these lost Roman heroes have one thing in common.
They stood up for civilization when the bad guys threatened, and in doing so, they changed the course of human history. If you're into history that's vivid, surprising, and deeply human, this show's for you.
Behind every great meal is a person with a story to tell. Hear them on Culinary Characters Unlocked, the podcast that reveals the lives behind the food. Hosted by me, David Page, Emmy Award-winning journalist and creator of Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, as I talk with everyone from culinary legends to mom-and-pop standouts about the creativity, grit, and passion that shape the food we love. Follow Culinary Characters Unlocked on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.